triggers previous trauma?
How do I cope with it?
Yeah.
How do I cope with... See, that's the thing. I don't look on it as previous trauma.
Yeah.
When, as I said earlier, you know what I mean? That's kind of way back then. Do you know what I mean? You go on a journey, if you like, and it's kind of who you become. You know what I mean? When you come up against, I would say when you come up against situations, how you deal with it, because it's not necessarily, I'm not going to deal with an adult situation based on trauma in my childhood. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You know, but you recognize your patterns as a person that you may have done back then to what you're doing now, and it's learning to kind of change the patterns, because who you were back then in survival mode isn't who you are now. So I would look on it as something that I need to learn.
I'm glad you said that. I mean, the other thing I'm thinking as well, do you think, because this isn't anything standard, this is just me being spontaneous here, sometimes we are the way we are due to our culture, the way we were raised. You know, for example, if you're an Asian family, potentially you're going to be like this, African family like that, West Indian family, the, you know, British family. Do you know what I mean?
What's your thinking based on that question?
That's a tricky one. Well, something that I can definitely say is, I'm not afraid to say that if we did wrong, if I ever told my Caucasian friends that at school, not if, when, they used to basically say that was violence kind of thing. And I just wondered if this is something that only happens in, you know, black families getting beaten with weapons, you know, ultimately. So do you think, you know, the way we are relates to the way we were raised culturally?
The way we are, no, not necessarily. I do believe it has some impact, but like I say, I mean, you know, people, you grow and you kind of make your own decisions for yourself, regardless of how you felt you was raised.
Yeah.
So I would say not necessarily. Everyone has a cultural aspect to their upbringing, you know what I mean? But the trauma, I couldn't even call it that, you know what I mean? It was something that occurred. I wouldn't even call it trauma, you know what I mean? You kind of, I felt that I kind of got on with it, if you know what I mean, you know? So I wouldn't look on it as something, yes, we all have our culture, like I said, but I wouldn't look on it as that shaped the way I was. I mean, one of the things that you find within the culture as well, not just the beating with a belt, but the lack of communication, the lack of being open, the lack of being able to express who you are in a controlled environment. If you was to do it, then you were seen as sassy. If you was to do it, you would be seen as feisty. So there was never any middle ground where you could go to your parent with an issue and say, this is what's occurring. 9 times out of 10, in my experience, my family didn't have, my mum and dad didn't have the kind of knowledge of what I would have faced dealing at school with the, you know, although they would have had some racism, but and in terms of being in work or whatever, but it's the whole institution behind it. They weren't of the view that you have emotional feelings with regards to something. They provided for you, they catered for your food, they put a roof over your head, and that for them was a lot more than enough. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anything emotional would have been too much. That, you know, I mean, I don't know what that was like for you growing up. Would you say the same thing, or was it different for you?
No, I mean, while you were speaking, sorry, I was kind of thinking more about, hopefully I haven't sort of wavered from the question. I have, and I'm sort of going to weave back into it, the how do you cope with behaviour that triggers previous trauma? And I basically mentioned about culture, you know, do you think we are the way we are related to culture? And I'm going to sort of say, the reason why I sort of said all of those things is because I remember when I saw Roots on TV. And I remember when I had to go to school after, and then the embarrassment of what the other kids of other cultures said to me. It was just embarrassing. It was just embarrassing being black in school.
Mm.
And it's almost like some of the things that happened en routes, it was almost like other cultures were getting an insight as to who we are, where we come from, and how we are, you know, at home, kind of a thing. So, yeah, I mean, I have to admit, sometimes cultural things, there's certain things that do sort of trigger me in a way. I mean, I keep on saying, I know, I feel like I'm sort of, I'm so, 1 minute I'm saying that, you know, get on with it, basically. But other times I'm thinking, actually, there are some things that I sort of think about that from childhood that I do sort of think about nowadays in a kind of workplace kind of thing. Because if we weren't different based on all of our cultures, then how comes we experience, well, I don't know if you experience anything at school, how comes we experience what we experienced at school and also at work if we're all so the same? We're not.
So what would you say the differences are that we're not the same?
I don't know, maybe so difficult this is. So 1 minute, maybe we are harsh as parents. Maybe we are. I don't feel I'm as harsh as my parents were with me. I don't think I can, on one hand, how many times, you know, don't get me wrong, I've smacked Tarek, you know, but definitely not more than literally one hand, the number of times, and never with something. And I don't know if that happens in Caucasian culture where they hit their child with something as well. Asian
But
culture,
based on you talking about roots and how you felt, you know, embarrassed about being black based on what they showed, and talking about the workplace and talking about the aspects in school, you said that they're not the same. What is the difference? Are you saying that the difference is that the way that black people treated their children back then was the difference in comparison to how white people were treated?
yeah, I'm saying that, but not. I'm not saying it with confidence. The reason I'm not saying it with confidence because I have read a number of books by, oh goodness, I can't remember what her name is. She's an amazing author, female author that talks about, mainly writes about gangsters, and it's true life gangsters. And then in the childhoods, you know, the kids was being. Then I thought, oh, then again, these are gangsters, sort of kids. You know, maybe it's different. But yeah, so some part of me thought that maybe our parents were, because they wanted more out of us. You know, they say we have to try harder, work harder, be smarter, and so on. And then when you go wrong, one little slight, you just get, you know, a beating. Basically, you're meant to be on a certain time, you're not home at that time, and then you get beaten in front of your friends. So your mum wants your friends to see this is what happens to this person. You know, if they don't come home by such and such a time. So somewhere in my mind, I just thought, yeah, you know, are our cultures different? Hence why we possibly got treated different. I mean, through no fault of our own. If you come from that culture, then when you go into whatever, into school, and people are a little bit different, you know, people are going to treat you differently. You know, I don't know. I mean, it was just a thought. It was just a thought. It was just a thought around a question. How do you cope with behaviour that triggers previous trauma? And it's one of those things where the trauma is not instantly in my mind, and it's just as we're going along, I'm just sort of coming up. I'm remembering things. I'm remembering things. It's like an onion kind of thing.
I I would say, I mean, there's a different generation to what um there was when we was growing up. And if you look outside of yourself, you mentioned workplace, you mentioned other bits and pieces. Culture is one of them. like you said, you know what I mean, the parents didn't have the capacity to interact with children, talk to children. Not all parents, I have to say, because I'm sure there's West Indian, Asian parents that were totally different with their children. But you have to, for me, you have to look at it outside. A lot of the ways that in the workplace, it's very different for black and white because of the institutions of it all. That never had nothing to do with culture. That hasn't got anything to do with culture. It's like a two-tier system, as far as I'm concerned, in the, you know, wider world of how people are treated differently. There's so many articles based on that, you know what I mean? In terms of black and Caucasian people, African, black African, whatever, you know what I mean? And that's going outside of their home. How you would have been treated in school, maybe as a black child in comparison to a white child would have been totally different. And you think about the chastisement of a black child in comparison to a white child. A white child is geared towards, you know, achieving and doing all that kind of stuff. Whereas black children in schools today are not geared towards that. You know what I mean? So it's like when you're stepping inside of a school gate, that ain't got nothing to do with your culture. You know what I mean? In terms of how you're being brought up in the house. You're institutionalized in terms of how society views you and where you should and shouldn't be.
So why do you think we get treated differently then? If it's not that we're different people, you know, our cultures or whatever.
I asked you that question.
Oh, is that? Oh, okay. Oh, right. Okay. Why do you think we get treated differently? You know, by schools and the workplace and so on. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If I was to dig deep, I would say that despite my initial embarrassment with roots, I'm not, you know, I had that embarrassment as a child, and I'm not going to say it, you know, it disappeared. It always stayed there. The embarrassment of roots and going to school and being called, you know, all the words under the sun. But despite all of that, I think as I've got older and I'm looking back, I think sometimes people treat you badly because of something they might envy in you or something they fear. So it's almost as if to say, imagine what we went through, or what our ancestors, I can't sort of take credit at all, what our ancestors went through, and still we rise.